Stories from Maine is a collection of true tales and legendary stories of daring, heroism, absurdity, disaster, and spectacle, all proving why many of the greatest legends in American history are our stories from Maine. From the sailors and soldiers statue at Monument Square, to the ever-popular Longfellow statue in Portland, and the famed Peace Monument at Washington, D.C., this man sculpted some of the most recognizable and most celebrated monuments in United States history. And this legendary artist was born in what is now Sabattus, Maine, and raised in the ship city of Bath. Stay with us and hear the true story of one of the greatest sculptors in American history, Maine's own Franklin Simmons. Next, on this all-new, weekly episode of Stories from Maine. Our podcast begins right now.
This is our Stories from Maine podcast for August 2nd of 2025. Stories from Maine is authored by historian Lori Suzanne Dell. Her books, Stories from Maine and Stories from Maine 2, as well as all of her books, are available through book retailers and can be found on Amazon. All new, weekly episodes of our Stories from Maine podcast stream each Saturday, exclusively on our YouTube channel. And our weekly articles, published in the Brunswick, Maine newspaper, The Times-Record, appear online and on newsstands each Friday. And you can follow Stories from Maine on our Facebook page, where we post new Maine history content each day. You can email us at storiesfrommaine@gmail.com.
Now, let's go to Oscar for our feature story of one of the greatest sculptors in American history, Maine's own Franklin Simmons.
Franklin Batchelder Simmons was born on January 11th of 1839 to Loring and Dorothea Batchelder Simmons at Webster, in what is now Sabattus, Maine. Franklin was brought to Bath as an infant, and his earliest recollections were of Bath. Franklin was a Mayflower descendant of John and Priscilla Alden, and of American Revolutionary War Captain Samuel Simmons, who served at Burgoyne and at Monmouth, and was with Washington at Valley Forge. Franklin's father Loring was a lumber manufacturer with a musical temperament, and Loring took part in many of the local orchestras, albeit, as Franklin once explained, in an amateur way. The Simmons family home was located at the north end of Washington Street in Bath, Maine, and Franklin always described himself as a Bath boy. Along with his Bath-born sister Adelaide, Franklin attended the North Grammar School at a time when, as Franklin explained, the boys were very bright and the girls were very beautiful. Among his youthful Bath playmates were boys named Charlie Elliott, James Gannett, and Scott and William Morse. And these adventurous young boys played on the banks of the Kennebec River during the prosperous days of shipbuilding, when there were always 20 or 30 ships on the stocks, being built by the local shipwrights of Bath's shipyards. At a young age, Franklin and his childhood playmate James Gannett would visit the art studio of local painter Pierce Harris, where they watched him at his work, painting the portraits of Bath people. From Harris's kindly encouragement of Franklin and his friend James, both decided to become great painters. Franklin left the city of Bath at 13 years of age, when his father moved the Simmons family to Lisbon for a few years, then to Lewiston. By age 16, Franklin entered the Maine State Seminary, which is now Bates College, but he was too poor to continue his studies there. 3 years later, in 1858, with little formal training or art education, Franklin opened his first art studio at the lower end of Main Street, near the bridge, in Lewiston. There he began to paint, and he started to sculpt. using free clay from the banks of the Androscoggin River. After Maine's former governor, Robert P. Dunlap of Brunswick, had died in October of 1859, Franklin received one of his first commissions to sculpt a bust of this popular chief executive. That bust sits today atop Dunlap's gravesite monolith in the Pine Grove Cemetery on Bath Road in Brunswick. Within a year or two, Simmons had all but abandoned his dreams of painting for a career as a sculptor. By the start of the American Civil War, Franklin had moved to Portland, where he created the first full-body statue ever made and set up in Maine. And that sculpture was of General Hiram Berry of Rockland. Within just a few short years, Franklin had made sculptures of generals, college presidents, mill owners, and governors. Franklin's high reputation as a great sculptor had spread quickly, and he was soon summoned to bring his talents to the Capitol at Washington. During this period, the American Civil War had begun, and as history was being made, many politicians and military men were making names for themselves, and Franklin's particular brand of sculpting was desired to capture the likenesses of these great people. While at Washington, Simmons carved marble statues of General Grant, Maine's first governor William King, Roger Williams of Rhode Island, former Vice President Hannibal Hamlin, and Governor Pierpont of Virginia. All of these magnificent statues are still displayed today in the Capitol Rotunda. Simmons also created a larger-than-life equestrian monument to Union General John Logan. This amazing sculpture was erected upon a large base and is displayed in the center of Logan Circle in America's capital at Washington. And Simmons also created the sculpture for the Peace Monument, which stands just outside the U.S. Capitol building. And Franklin Simmons also created a sculpture of his dear mother, Dorothea. By the end of the American Civil War, Franklin Simmons had created busts and medallions of Union Navy admirals, Farragut and Porter, and he spent a week with General Grant at City Point. Simmons also met with President Abraham Lincoln to schedule a sitting time to sculpt America's 16th president. But within 2 days of meeting Lincoln, the president had become the victim of a vengeful Southern assassin named John Wilkes Booth. Not long after President Abraham Lincoln's death, on April 15th of 1865, Franklin Simmons captured the likeness of Lincoln on a medallion sculpture, and though a full-body sculpture of the president was planned, the untimely assassination of Lincoln ended that possibility. We'll be right back.
Our Stories from Maine weekly podcast episodes stream each Saturday on our YouTube channel. And our weekly articles, published in the Brunswick newspaper, The Times Record, appear online and on newsstands each Friday. And, each day, we post images and information on Maine's history on our Facebook page. So, please take a moment to like, share, comment, follow, and subscribe to Stories from Maine on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Stories from Maine. And, you can email us at storiesfrommaine@gmail.com.
Let's now go back to Oscar for the rest of this week's feature story on Maine's legendary American sculptor, Franklin Simmons.
By 1868, Franklin Simmons had moved to Rome, Italy, to study art and to open a studio of his own. While there, Simmons became a student of another American sculptor, John Adams Jackson, who was also from Bath, Maine. There, in Rome, Franklin Simmons was able to hone his skills, learn new techniques, and immerse himself in European art history. And while there, Simmons also created many of the original models, which would be used to create many of his soon-to-be famous sculptures. And those sculptures would later be cast and erected in the United States. By 1888, Simmons was back in Maine, and his newest 15-foot-tall bronze statue was being erected in what became Monument Square. This huge monument was created to honor the 5,000 sailors and soldiers of Portland who died in service to the United States during the American Civil War. This sculpture was titled Our Lady of Victories, and it displayed many of the Romanesque qualities which Simmons had adopted from his European studies. Today, 138 years later, this monument still stands as a centerpiece of the city of Portland. And in that same summer, Simmons' bronze creation of Portland, Maine's great poet, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, was also erected in Portland. This time, Longfellow's statue would be placed at what has come to be known as Longfellow Square. This monument sits at the opposite end of Congress Street, just a mile from Simmons' statue at Monument Square. Both of these sculptures were originally modeled in Simmons' studio in Rome. By the summer of 1909, Franklin Simmons was once again in America, and he had returned to Bath, Maine, for one last visit with his old childhood friends, and he gave an extended interview to a young newspaper reporter. In that interview, Simmons recounted his childhood in Maine and how he got started as a sculptor, and he credited many of the people of Bath with influencing his choice to become an artist. In his lifetime, Franklin Simmons had produced many dozens of sculptures, medallions, and busts. His works are displayed in libraries, museums, state capitals, national monuments, schools, and parks in the United States. On December 8th of 1913, Franklin Simmons died at the age of 74 at his home in Rome, Italy, and he is buried in what is known as the Protestant Cemetery under a statue that Simmons had himself created for his late wife. Today, Franklin Simmons is considered as one of the most prominent and most prolific of all the American sculptors in United States history, and as one of the greatest artistic legends ever enshrined in our statuesque Stories from Maine.
We hope you have enjoyed this week's feature story on one of America's greatest sculptors, Maine's own Franklin Simmons. Please come back next Saturday for another all-new, weekly episode of our Stories from Maine podcast. Thanks for joining us.
All Stories from Maine original content is copyright protected, with all rights reserved. Our Stories from Maine logos are trademark protected and may not be used without the express written permission of Stories from Maine author and historian, Lori Suzanne Dell. Thank you for listening. See you next week.